Emotional Agility by psychologist Susan David is a nonfiction self-help book designed to help people embrace difficult emotions that hold them back in life and work, so they can thrive even in the most challenging of situations. David outlines a four-part method for becoming emotionally agile. The four parts are facing emotions, creating distance from those emotions, identifying core values, and making small habitual changes in accordance with those values. When people become more emotionally aware, they can learn to create distance between themselves and their emotional experience. This distance helps them to see their situations and their emotions from a new perspective. Once they look at a situation from a different vantage point, they can choose how to react in line with their values. People who are emotionally agile are able to overcome emotional blocks and are more adaptable to stress and difficulties. Emotions are a valuable guide to navigating life. They can be signals that the people experiencing them are afraid of failure or rejection or aren't acting in accordance with their values. While it might be tempting to think positively in the face of challenges, it's important for people to consider all their emotions without sugarcoating their negative feelings. The inner life can be a valuable source of information and guidance, but only if people are willing to step away from default, instinctual responses to their emotions. For example, a person who feels resentful on the job might suppress those feelings, only to see the resentment expressed in passive ways, such as a snarky comment directed at the boss. People who are emotionally agile tend to be more open-minded, flexible, successful, and happier than those who are emotionally rigid. Many people have emotional responses that are cyclical and self-defeating. Most people have automatic responses to stressful emotions. They may shut down and suppress their feelings, or they may agonize about their feelings and frequently vent to anyone who will listen. In each case, the person is unable to move past the difficulty of the emotional response. In these ways, emotions control people's lives, although they are often not conscious of this. They become hooked or stuck on a destructive pattern of responses, thoughts, or behaviors. Therapist Andrea Matthews posits that there's no such thing as a negative emotion. Yet the culture industry often sends the message that unpleasant emotions should not be expressed. Matthews recommends thinking about emotions like taste buds that tell us about the flavor of our lives. According to Matthews, when people get caught in an unhelpful emotional response cycle, such as chronic anger or fear, they are unlikely to see such emotions as useful. But if they examine their feelings, they might glean information that is helpful in making decisions. Consider a recently divorced woman who is feeling lonely. Both of her parents are ill, and the bulk of their home and health care falls to her. She additionally needs to take care of her son, which leaves her little time for finding a companion and taking care of her own needs. When she meets a man who captures her interest, she might become convinced that being with him would solve all her problems. But instead of taking action, for instance, by asking him out on a date, the woman delays and broods over her situation. The man has been flirtatious but hasn't made a clear signal, so she interprets this to mean he's not yet interested. She is hooked on the thought and ruminates over it for days, until one day when she unloads her feelings to him in an outburst after running into him in a grocery store parking lot. Although he is interested in her, the sheer force of her emotions overwhelms him. Because she hasn't taken the time to examine her feelings, she probably won't realize that her deep emotions aren't entirely caused by the ambivalence of this man she barely knows. Her emotional response is a tangle of her loneliness, sorrow, and frustration about being a newly single mother and watching her parents' health decline. She's worried that no one will be able to take care of her when she gets older. Her self-defeating emotional responses, when left unchecked, become obstacles to living a healthy and fulfilling life. When handled with mindfulness, emotions can provide valuable guidance for navigating life. Even negative emotions like fear and anger contain important messages and serve a function. For example, chronic frustration with a mate could signify that a relationship needs to evolve. When people bottle up their emotions or express them indiscriminately, they miss the chance to see what their emotions are trying to convey. It's more helpful to take a dispassionate view of emotions as responses to the outside world and strive to understand what useful information is outlined by those responses. One crucial way that emotions communicate wisdom is illustrated in The Gift of Fear, 1997. Written by personal security expert Gavin de Becker, The Gift of Fear explores the importance of paying attention to fear and gut responses as a way of maintaining personal safety. In the book's opening chapter, Becker relays the story of Kelly, a young woman who was in the corridor of her apartment building when she dropped some of the groceries she was carrying. A seemingly kind young man she'd never seen before offered to help carry her bags. Kelly had an uneasy feeling about the man. Although she was hesitant to accept his help, she relented when he insisted. After he persuaded her to let him into her apartment to drop the bags, he raped her at gunpoint for 3 hours. When he was finished, he said that he was going to get some water and told her not to move. Kelly felt profound, bone-chilling fear that prompted her to shadow the man out to the kitchen and sneak out the door while he rifled through her kitchen drawer for a knife. She later found out that he had stabbed another victim to death. Had she not paid careful attention to her fear, Kelly would likely be dead. Kelly's experience, while extreme, is a demonstration of just how important messages conveyed by emotions can be. Her emotional agility saved her life. Stress is a normal part of life that can occasionally prove helpful. Stress shouldn't be viewed as the enemy. In fact, when people worry about being too stressed, they only increase their emotional burdens. Instead, people should accept that stress is somewhat normal and can become a key motivator. When people change their relationship to stress, they have an easier time managing it. In her book, The Thyroid Connection 2016, Dr. Amy Myers, an integrative medicine doctor, writes about how stress functioned as a contributing factor to her own thyroid condition. At the time of Myers' diagnosis, her mother had just died, and she was maintaining a hectic academic schedule in medical school. Myers learned that she didn't have to get rid of her commitments, which were her ostensible sources of stress, to maintain her health and well-being. She simply needed to incorporate stress reduction activities into her schedule to counteract the adverse physiological effects of stress. Now, when she treats patients, Myers doesn't tell them to eliminate the stress in their lives. In the first place, many people enjoy their demanding jobs and fast-paced schedules. She writes, "The goal is not to eliminate stress, but to relieve it." A simple shift in attitude towards stress, like the one Myers recommends, can be a form of stress reduction in itself. When people stop fretting about their stress levels, they have one less thing to worry about. This in turn allows them to focus on responses to other meaningful emotions. Being overly optimistic or positive can be counterproductive to thriving in life. Popular culture has largely embraced the notion that positive thinking is the key to overcoming emotional difficulties. In a recent Newsweek article, writer Michael Bland states, "The idea that you can be happy if you simply choose to be has been integrated into America's military, classrooms, and workplaces to improve coping skills, performance, and mental health." Yet positive thinking often results in a tendency to gloss over potentially important emotions. The positive thinking approach becomes simply another way that social norms mandating a positive outlook and demeanor encourage people to numb their emotional difficulties, including with medication. Being overly optimistic or positive can be counterproductive to thriving in life. There is a significant downside to forced optimism, which can cause discord in interpersonal relationships or even inner conflict when people feel they always have to maintain an upbeat attitude to fit into society. Barbara Held, a professor of psychology at Bowdoin College, says that attempting to maintain a non-stop cheery attitude can result in what she calls the tyranny of the positive attitude, or TPA. She says, "By TPA, I mean that our culture has little tolerance for those who can't smile and look on the bright side in the face of adversity." Forced and inauthentic positivity can affect a person's colleagues and friends negatively. For example, a woman might get frequent text message updates from a friend of hers who is going through a rough patch. Her friend can't make up his mind about whether or not to stay in a deeply unsatisfying relationship, so he writes to her whenever his emotions get the best of him. He covers up his real feelings with blanket statements like, "It's all good," and "everything happens for a reason." His insistence that he remain positive is not only preventing him from taking actions to change his situation, but his constant repetition of positive mantras over text message also adversely affects his friendship. His friend is extremely frustrated that he seems to want her to affirm his positive yet completely disingenuous stance. She also often feels sad when she reads their text exchanges because she can sense the deep melancholy beneath his positive affirmations that everything in life always works out for the best. In time, his overly optimistic outlook will erode their bond and prevent him from taking healthy, productive steps to change his situation and find genuine happiness and fulfillment. To become emotionally agile, people should be willing to examine their emotions and articulate them with precise language. Once people become unhooked from their default emotional responses, they are able to reconsider them. People can confront heavy emotions by being honest with themselves about how they really feel, and then figuring out a way to integrate their feelings into their lives, perhaps by making life changes that will help address their difficulties. Showing up, or facing into your thoughts, behaviors, and emotions willingly with curiosity and kindness, also might lead people to acknowledge limiting thoughts that accompany these heavy emotions, which includes negative thoughts like, "I'm such a failure." In order to tap into the transformative power of emotions, it's important for people to accept themselves exactly as they are. Renowned psychoanalyst Carl Jung famously documented how he showed up for his emotions and darkest demons in the Red Book 2009, which chronicles his 20-year battle to recover his soul. At the age of 40, Jung had achieved great personal and professional successes, which gave him honor, power, wealth, knowledge, and every human happiness. Yet he felt completely empty inside and overwhelmingly horrified by this emptiness. So he completely embraced his emotions, about which he wrote extensively. He also created visual images as a means of self-expression. After realizing that his emptiness reflected a feeling of separation from his soul, Jung said to himself, "My soul, where are you? I have returned, I am here again. After long years of wandering, I have come to you again." The average person might not undergo a 20-year quest to figure out the meaning of their emotions and come home to their soul as Jung did. But his experience of showing up for his emotions illustrates that when people decide to be fully present with their inner landscape, they can effect profound life transformations. Creating distance from emotions allows people to gain better perspective on their situations. People can create distance from their most troubling thoughts by locating the situation at hand in a wider context. This distance helps to create a gap between an initial emotional reaction and a more reflective response to the situation. Creating distance from emotions allows people to gain a better perspective on their situations. Distance helps people make choices that are thoughtful and well considered. Writing down reflections is a useful way for people to gain a healthy perspective and examine the lessons that they have learned in the process of examining their emotions. In an article for Quartz, writer Suzanne Gillette describes how she found greater meaning in her emotions after stepping out of a knee-jerk emotional response. As a sexual assault survivor, she had become emotionally triggered when she heard the tape of then-US presidential candidate Donald Trump boasting about sexually assaulting women. A flood of old feelings came back to her, and she reacted to the event of the leaked tape as if it were equivalent to her personal experience with assault many years earlier. In a stroke of good fortune, Gillette happened to be reading a book about mindfulness. Reading it helped her step away from the news cycle and gain some distance from her distress, which she identified as an involuntary, triggered response. A few hours later, Gillette had an unexpected spiritual epiphany, enabled by the emotional distance she'd taken from her initial reaction. She had a sudden thought about the commonality she shared with Trump. They are both members of the human race. This connection resulted in a surprise moment of personal humility for Gillette as she contemplated the harm human beings are capable of inflicting. She writes, "I was also undeniably humbled, devastated that someone within our tribe could cause himself and others such harm." Her experience is an example of how stepping back from challenging emotions can yield meaningful perspectives that can contribute to a person's growth, open-mindedness, and happiness. People should examine their values to make decisions that accord with those values. It's easy to make decisions based on what friends, family, and social groups deem acceptable. People should examine their values to make decisions that accord with those values. When people start to figure out what's truly important to them, that is, what they value themselves, they often discover that the process can take a long time. Crafting a life based on personal values is important, however, even when it means rejecting social expectations. If people make decisions based on another person's values and not their own, they will likely experience negative emotions and feel stuck. For example, a young man might decide to go to college instead of pursuing his dream of working on a fishing boat in Alaska, simply because his peers are all applying to college. He's never enjoyed being in a classroom, and the thought of spending money and time on an endeavor that seems irrelevant to his future becomes a source of stress. He may enroll in college and feel completely miserable the whole time. Even his academic achievements may seem hollow because he simply doesn't value higher education as a viable use of his time. His unhappiness leads him to reflect on his choices. How could he have made a better decision? He ultimately accepts the fact that college isn't his dream, quits, and applies to work on a fishing boat. It's the life that he's enthusiastic about living regardless of what others think. In his new environment, he might feel more at ease because he's not battling inner conflict by living out someone else's values and dreams. His decisions are in line with his inner self. Fortunately, when people gain clarity about their values, their emotional responses become more flexible and enable them to adapt emotionally to changing circumstances in the external world. Habits should be evaluated and tweaked so that actions, beliefs, and routines are in line with values and emotions. Emotionally agile people ditch sweeping transformational gestures and instead focus on habits, thoughts, and actions of a smaller scope. Small and gradual adjustments can make a large and lasting impact. Habits should be evaluated and tweaked so that actions, beliefs, and routines are in line with values and emotions. For example, David Ebershoff, a best-selling author and editor, started writing his first novel, The Danish Girl 2000, one early morning at a time. Ebershoff was working as an editor at Random House, and his full-time job didn't allow him expansive writing sessions whenever he felt like it. So Ebershoff decided to undertake his project in bite-sized chunks. He woke up every morning to write from 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. before heading to the office. This practice worked so well that Ebershoff, who had worked with luminaries such as Norman Mailer and Jane Jacobs, went on to write other critically acclaimed books, including The 19th Wife 2009. After a major motion picture based on The Danish Girl was released in 2015, Ebershoff decided it was time to quit his editing job so that he could write full-time. His transition from full-time editor to full-time writer took many years to complete, but it all started with his daily determination to continue writing. Ebershoff's career change is one example of how starting with a small practice can yield substantial, life-altering choices.